The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch UK Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised. You're listening to Paranormal Concept right here on Parasearch UK Radio with your host, Paul Rook.
Good evening and welcome to the Paranormal Concept Show. My name is Kerry Greenaway and I know you're used to listening to Mr. Paul Rook on a Tuesday evening, but he's got gremlins in his system so he can't make it tonight. But I am joined in the studio by the lovely Jolene. Good evening, Jo.
Hi, lovely, and thank you. I can't believe I'm actually doing this with you tonight. I thought you might have enough of me on a Monday.
Oh, never get enough of you, darling.
Oh, bless your little heart. So how have you been then? Have you been all right?
I've been very well, thank you. Not bad at all. Catching up with everything today that I've let slip away from me. I was supposed to go live yesterday and did it today instead. That was fun. It's supposed to be a quiet time on a Tuesday morning, right?
Yeah. Well, I actually saw your live this morning. I was like, oh, bless her. Everything just happened all at once, didn't it? The telephone, the dogs barking.
Yeah. I mean, what the hell? I was like, you're supposed to be like quiet on a Tuesday morning. Nobody was around. I thought, great, I've got time. Oh, anyway, it all went a little bit Pete song this morning on the live, but we're here tonight with you and we're going to be talking everything about exorcisms. Now, this is a very emotive topic. We've seen it, we're starting to see people doing live exorcisms on Facebook socials, or I say the socials, it's not just Facebook, is it? It's still in the news on a daily basis. It's something that's really sort of out there and it's not necessarily a good thing. What do you think, Jo?
I think it's quite one of those, I think it's taboo still, isn't it? I think, you know, when people start to mention exorcisms, people kind of run in fright or fear or something like that. But, I mean, we were just having a bit of a brief discussion earlier, weren't we, about tonight on BBC News, there was something to do with an undercover reporter actually going and being exorcised by somebody. Just literally like tonight, and I was like, how weird is that? You couldn't have written it, to be honest, especially after what we've been having a look at today, and you know, when we read through some of the stuff and you know some of the history of exorcisms, just to have that on BBC News tonight was unbelievable.
It does seem to be very prevalent at the moment. I mean, as I say, you know, it seems to be popping up everywhere, and I find it at times. I find it very horrific. This whole situation. I think it's something that should be dealt with very kid gloves, and so much work needs to be done before you start looking into exorcisms or exercising or whatever it is you want to class it as. I think it should be a lot more into it. I mean, the case you saw on the news earlier, the money involved is crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how people get away. It's because it's not regulated, is it either? You know, somebody can actually just go and exorcise somebody just by, you know, saying a couple of prayers from a Bible, but it's not regulated, even though it should be. But you get, it's like any sort of like spiritual work or anything like that, where there's money to be made, people will exploit it, won't they?
Yeah, that's very, very true. Incredibly true. But it seems to be, the one thing that shocked me actually when we were looking at it was it's not just, I always thought it was a Catholic thing. I always I was always under the impression it was like just a Catholic thing, and it was just something like that. But when we was researching it today, it goes back so far, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, like the Hindu religion obviously said that around about 1000 BC is when it was referring to the evil beings and things like that. So it does go back, and And there are some obviously ancient Persian writings as well from as far back as 600 BC as well. So it does give you just an idea of how far apparently demons and things like that. And I mean, you know what I'm like, Kerry. I'm straight down the line. You know, yeah, I am a medium, but I have to debunk quite a lot of stuff. And demons and things like that. I do believe in negativity and I do believe in negative beings and things like that. But touch wood, not once have I come across a demon as of yet.
No, they are incredibly rare. A very, very rare thing. They're not something that's just going to pop up around every corner, which certain television programs have given you, they've led you to believe that every place that's haunted has got a demon and stuff like that. But they're incredibly rare. But they are within every single culture. And we've come across this, and when we've researched various topics across the Parasearch shows, it has been, this negative entity or demon factor comes up time and time again. There is a strong belief that there are entities that you could class as demons, but they're so rare. And whether or not they would bother to inhabit another person, I kind of find that a little hard to believe at times. When we was looking at some of the cases, I was thinking, why would they bother? If you're going to possess somebody, then surely you're going to possess somebody that's got power, so you could make even more bad things happen, surely. I don't know whether that's a very naive view or what, but I'm kind of thinking, if I was a demon and I wanted to cause trouble for the world, as it were, I kind of wouldn't bother with a nobody. I'd kind of go for somebody who's a bit higher in the system.
Well, they do say, don't they? They do say that Donald Trump does have a bit of a demon inside him, don't they, for doing what he does? But anyway,
true.
That's a different story.
It's a different show.
but even with the famous cases that have been documented over the past, so many years, like Annalise, she was a very young girl, wasn't she? Then the Exorcist guy, Robbie, he was a young boy as well. So it always tends to center around, I would probably say prepubescent or pubescent people, or people who have had ailments and dare I say it, mental illnesses.
Yes,
it's some form of weakness or something. I think that's my view on it. I think some people who are mentally strong just back the negativity off quite often, but people who aren't very mentally strong do kind of suffer with depression and anxiety and things like that, and life does get people down. So I can understand why people would seem to think that people are possessed in everyday normal life, if you understand what I mean. I'm trying to explain my thinkings of it, but it's not coming out quite right.
No, you're explaining yourself beautifully. Now, do you think then that people who mess with like the darker side of things, which without knowledge are at risk of that? Because that's been a theory as well, hasn't it? People that are messing with things they don't understand are opening themselves up for attachment, spirit attachment.
I think it's just in any sort of spiritual realm, though, isn't it? I mean, we always protect guests who come on events and things like that, because the last thing we want is for any sort of spirit to attach themselves to anybody. So it doesn't really matter if you're practicing the dark arts or the occult or anything like that. If a spirit wants to attach itself to you and you haven't protected yourself, you haven't taken the steps to understand what you're dealing with, then you are leaving yourself wide open.
I totally agree with that. Bearing in mind I work a little bit in the weirder ways. I don't like to label it, but you do have to do that kind of work, and you have to be very aware of what you're doing before you do it, just to protect yourself, really. I just find that integral part of the work, but I find belief system is incredibly important in this too. If you believe you're protected and that nothing can touch you in that respect, then you don't tend to get it. I'm not saying you're completely protected from it, because if they find a chink in your armour, they will. But at the end of the day, your belief system and the strength of your belief system is really important for that.
Yeah, I know. My mum, like I mentioned my mum. My mum always said to me when I was younger, always work in the light. And I always said to myself, regardless of whatever happens throughout my life or anything, and I've had some pretty dark times, and, I would always be polite. I'd always be kind to people. I would always work in the light. And my mum, she worked in white witchcraft. My mum's, she's phenomenal. She's a beautiful person, and she's so caring. But she always taught me that. So I've got that belief system. But I don't know about you, but when you're brought up by your parents, you tend to listen to everything that they said back in the day, didn't you? You come in before dark, you do this, and nothing bad will happen to you. So you tend to trust your parents. Yeah. And that's what my mum said to me. She said, "You'll never go far wrong if you always work within the light." So belief systems is massive, isn't it? It's huge everywhere. Even in Brazil, they believe in, they pray to Jesus, and they do everything like that. But still, like you say, if they find the chinks in the armour, they will get through.
That's true. And we're going to have a look at a few cases in a minute where the belief system has a positive, what should be a positive belief system, has actually been twisted into something that's become a negative situation, should we say.
Yeah.
But we'll come on to that in a minute. Now, we looked into, I had to do this because, that's the kind of girl I am. I was thinking, okay, so we always talk about like the demon, but what types of entity can affect people? Because we always, it's always people jumping into a demon has possessed you kind of scenario. It's not necessarily that. So I found a lady called Kristen Barton, who's a behaviourist analyst. I don't know what that is, but it sounds good. And she came up with 4 different types of entities or spirits that could affect a person. Now, some of these make sense to me. Okay. Now, one of those was people that have passed over who haven't quite accepted that they've passed over. So they're trying to cling on to the thing. I wouldn't say that was a negative thing, though. That's just not passing over. It's just wanting to stay in, maybe not being ready to pass over. They just want to stay where they're loved and protected, or where they feel they were loved the most, right?
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say that was a negative thing, necessarily.
No. I think usually when you've got departed parents, aunts, uncles, or anything like that who haven't fully crossed over, then usually what will happen is people will adopt certain mannerisms of that person, which could be perceived as being possession. So that is, I can understand that, because, I mean, how many times have you kind of morphed into your mother and said, "You do that again"? And, we all find ourselves doing it, don't we? But
we do, unfortunately.
That's the same old in death as well, though, isn't it? Like, I know when I've been on events and I've been stood shaking, thinking to myself, "This isn't me. Who is this?" Yeah. And then I've realised then that I'm taking on somebody else's ailments, and obviously said to Gemma before, I think I've had a stroke. I said, I feel like all the left hand, or like all my right hand side of me is shaking. I've either got Parkinson's or something. But that's how it can affect people. Spirit affect people in a number of different ways, don't they? So I think that's not negative. I think that's more of a, I think that's quite a nice one, to be honest, if you're going to be possessed by somebody who's in your family.
Yeah, and spirit will quite often put their, like you just said, put their symptoms on you, so you can provide that validation for somebody. How often on platform mediumship have we seen a medium say, like you said, "Oh, I'm shaking, it would have been that kind of condition," or "I think they passed as a heart problem," or something like that. Not because the entity is, or the spirit is actually causing an issue for that person, but they're just demonstrating for validation. And the minute that validation is given, it goes.
Yeah, definitely. But you've also got trans mediums, though, who actually morph into that person, which that is an art form in itself. I think I've done it once, and that was the most scariest thing I've ever done, and I would never ever do it again. But that is because I didn't know how to control it. I'd never done it before, and it was like, this makes me feel really strange. And it was like I was there, but this person was talking, and I was like, I need to get back. And it was like, no, I'm here and I'm going to talk. And it was like, no, I need to get back now. I want my body back, basically.
Yeah.
So
there's a very trust vulnerable scenario going on there, isn't there? You've got to trust that you're strong enough and your guides are strong enough to control that spirit using your body, and allowing yourself to be vulnerable enough to allow that spirit to step in and use your body. It's a very trust vulnerable scenario going on there.
Yeah. It was nice, but that leads me on then to obviously like the non-human entities, like the low level entities that can kind of inhibit people who have never been human, never walked the earth and done that, which it's, where do those low level entities come from?
They're generally classed as elementals, that they're not as aware of, they're not overly conscious. They're just existing, and you can call on them to help you with various things and give them an intention, and that comes through a vibration and feel. You're giving them of how you want something to happen. That's why you have to tune yourself into that emotion for them to get that point. Now they can become too connected if you allow them to come too connected, and that's usually because they're attracted to what the vibration that you're giving out. That's what they want. They want that attraction. But again, it's not a conscious maliciousness, although they can affect you in the ways of making you feel depressed and stuff like that, because they're using your energy, and basically that's what that is. So they're called the bottom feeders, as it were, because they're not overly conscious. They're not doing it with a malicious intent, which when we look at some of the cases, it's definitely a malicious intent. Now the other kind is, now this is humans. This is a human thing, very, very similar to a non-human bottom feeder, as it were. Psychic vampires who draw on your energy, and we've all had that. We've talked about psychic vampires in depth before now, who drain your energy and can leave you feeling very depressed and down. But if it's a bit like a battery, if someone's drained your energy, there is not a lot left. And if you are in that lower energy state, darker, your mind monkeys, I call them, your fears, your doubts, your anxieties will surface more. So that could feel very negative, even though somebody may not even realise they're doing that. We've all got that friend who comes around, and by the time they've gone, you're like, oh, thank God they've gone. I'm so exhausted. And that's not being rude. Or somebody stood too close. I love this one, where someone stands too close to you in the supermarket and it creeps you out and you're absolutely exhausted when they've moved away, and you don't even know why. And they probably don't even realise they're doing it.
I hate that though. When you stood in the queue and you can feel somebody and it's like somebody breathing on you, and then you sort of like turn around and realise that they're not actually breathing on you. They're actually stood right at the back of you. And it's like, no, I hate stuff like that anyway. And I can always tell when somebody's really close, and I kind of move myself away anyway. Yeah,
I'm the same. I deliberately sort of cause a problem so they can't stand too close to me. Or I give them the look, as if to say, get out of my space. Unfortunately, if you're on a packed train... if you're on a packed train, you can't do that though, can you? You just have to sort of like shuffle away a little bit and move away as quickly as you can.
Oh God, that's so funny.
And then we have what people class as the demons, like, real live and kicking demons, which are, we've said before, are incredibly, incredibly rare. But the belief system is that they do exist, that they are out there somewhere.
Yeah. But I'm thinking that every time Ghost Adventures is on there, they're bringing up demons left, right and centre at the minute. So they must all be in America.
That's okay. They can stay over there.
I was just about to say, I think I'm just trying to bring a little bit of humour to the situation. But no, it is a serious subject though, isn't it? I mean, we were talking earlier, the Vatican last year hosted 250 brand new exorcists. Mm-hmm. That's mad. That is absolutely mental. And how many cases of possession haven't actually been documented? That would be a question that I would really like to ask.
Yeah. And then what do they class as being, like possessed.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the immediate mind imagery conjured up is the film, isn't it? It's where he's on the bed, or the girl is on the bed, and the pea green soup, and the head twisting round and levitating, and all hell's breaking loose. And it's, you know, so that is what we all imagine now as a possession. But you never hear of cases like that, do you? You know, in all honesty.
To be honest, I remember seeing a film with Anthony Hopkins in called The Right. And that film was really, really. I saw it a few years ago actually, and it was an exorcism, but he was a priest, and he was teaching a young priest at the time. And I can't, to be honest with you, I need to watch it again because it was such a good film and it was so informative. But it actually showed the actual priest himself getting possessed.
Oh.
So I think the young priest had to exorcise him in the end, and it was such a great film, and it's one that's probably not been, you know, highly acclaimed or anything like that, or being broadcast quite a lot, because we know the normal ones, The Entity, The Exorcist, and you know the ones, The Exorcism of Emily Rose, and there's a brand new one out as well at the end of this month, isn't there? It's and I can't remember what that film's called, but there is a new Exorcist one that's coming out.
Is that the one where she's supposed to die? You see her on the gurney.
I think she's supposed to die, but she doesn't, does she? And she needs a new host, basically. So yeah, but I think going back, it kind of gives you the Italian spiel on it, and how the Vatican would deal with it. And it's a fab film. So if anybody wants to watch it, it's called The Right, and it's got it's RITE, and it's got Anthony Hopkins. Is it Anthony Hopkins? Yeah, I think it is. Yeah,
he's a great actor, though, isn't he?
Oh, he's fab. Yeah, and it is quite dark. It is really dark in places, but it's a fab film.
Yeah, I can imagine. He plays that part immensely. Well, he plays every part immensely, doesn't he? Let's be fair.
Yeah, but it's like anything, though. Anything that's being made into a Hollywood movie, anything of supernatural, they like, you know, we're thinking about, you know, poltergeist activity and stuff like that, and nothing's ever, you know, paranormal activity, nothing's ever going to be not scary, is it? Really, there's not going to have the jump factor or anything like that in it, because nobody would watch it.
That's very, very true. Very, very true. Yeah. So I have to say, doing some research today on this, I was a little, what's the word, outraged, I think is the word, at some of the symptoms that they classed as spirit possession. Now, one site I went on to, everything was a sign of possession, from eating disorders to depression to suicidal thoughts. In fact, one site, everything they listed, I would have put down to mental health.
Yeah.
Quite frankly. And that worried me, because I thought, God, if you're feeling all these things and you're trying to like Google your symptoms, as it were, and you came across that site, by the end of it, you would have been convinced that you was spirit possessed.
Yeah.
Although there is a thought in certain circles these days that mental health illness is being caused by spirit attachment. I mean, we had Dr. Terence Palmer on a little while ago who went, you know, he's going down that route and researching that route and working with mental health patients. And it's quite a shamanic perspective as well. So I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm just saying there's work being done to research that. But some of the other signs that I found, which I'm going to read some of these out because it was like, oh my goodness. Knocking, groaning, creaking, pounding, or other noises at night. Well, if you've got my neighbours, that ticks that box. Manifestation of maggots or cockroaches or insects. But obviously, if you've got a dirty, filthy house, then you can't really count that one, right? Yeah, you kind of have to look at that one. A manifestation of substances with no explanation, like slime, blood, that sort of thing. Lovely.
Yeah.
Lovely. impossible things happening, like glasses of water tripping over but the water doesn't spill, things floating in midair. Honestly, this is a paranormal investigator's dream. Sudden disappearance of things with no explanation. Well, we all blame the fairies for that one, don't we?
Or the carpet monsters.
Yeah. And does that include socks, I wonder?
Yeah, the socks always go on the floor, don't they? And my daughter seems to say to me, "Is the carpet monster coming today, Mum?" And I'm like, "Yeah, obviously."
I mean, I had money going missing in this house once upon a time a little while ago, and I was like, someone's taking it, surely. Well, no, apparently not. Maybe I was being possessed at the time I was spending it. I don't know. It would explain a lot, to be fair. Stuff being broken with no explanation. Well, if you've got children, there's always an explanation.
Yeah, exactly.
Desecration or smashing of religious objects. Well, the majority, I would say, of people don't have those things around anymore.
They don't, do they? I can't remember the last time. I think my nan had something in her bedroom when I was really, really young, but I haven't seen anybody who has any sort of religious objects anymore. No crosses, no nothing.
No, whereas most people used to have like an altar-ish type thing with a cross and, rosary beads or something like that. Or is that just Catholic? I don't know.
That is so weird that you've just said that, because I've got like a necklace stand, where you put all your jewellery and things like that, and it's on a chest of drawers in my bedroom, and I've just looked, and as I'm talking to you, it's actually got the sign of the cross, and it's the shadow of the sign of the cross, and I was like, no way.
It's protecting you.
I don't have anything like that in my house, and I'm like,
and then now you're looking and you're going, oh, actually I do.
Actually, yeah, there is a cross in my house.
Well, no, you're okay as long as it doesn't get desecrated or smashed, all right?
Yeah, well.
Okay, yeah. Smells of rotting substances like sulphur or rotting eggs. Check your drains, I would say, before you worry about that one. Now, in regard to your personal self, symptoms that could appear would be scratches that just appear, which we discussed last week, actually, on this show. We talked about, spirit attacks. We class them as spirit attacks. It is for the thrill factor of the word. So we discussed that, and we did find some rational explanations, possible explanations, should I say. Right, now this is just weird. Defecation or urinating in weird places.
Why would you do that anyway?
True, but then if you're possessed, then this is a sign, right?
Right, okay. Well, does that mean when your partner's been out on a Friday night and he's going in the wardrobe, that kind of thing, is that possession?
Possibly. I mean, we spoke
Not
to Chris...
saying that my partner's ever done that. But I'm just saying, is that going to be one of those, is that going to be one of those, like, because I'm sure somebody's husband, it always tends to be men.
Yeah.
When they've been out and had a skinful with their mates, they'll come in and think that they've gone to the toilet, and they haven't actually gone to the toilet. They've gone in the wardrobe, or they've opened the door thinking that it was the toilet and it wasn't.
Yeah, ex-boyfriend did that, just saying. Needless to say, ex-boyfriend, just saying. Yeah. That was like the night I went, right, I've got to go now. I'll see you later. Bye, forever.
No, my boyfriend hasn't done that yet, so I'm very, very lucky.
Sudden, get this one. Inappropriate sexual acting out, which includes moaning, writhing and cursing. I'm laughing at that, but I shouldn't really, because if you are possessed, and this is probably horrible, eating non-food items.
Okay. What about these pregnant women who are eating rubber and things like that?
Yeah, and there are some people that have these urges just all of a sudden to eat glass or
tires and
weird stuff.
One of my friends lived like, the pencil erasers. She used to chew them, and I was like, what are you doing?
Ew. Ooh.
But no, weird.
Each to their own, I suppose. Tormented physically, suddenly feeling like you're being punched or beaten. That's one of them. But some of the more serious ones were like changes in your voice demeanour, things that you never knew or shouldn't know, speaking in unknown languages.
That's usually a common one, though, that isn't it? Because
yes, I would say that's quite a good one.
when it's a proper demon possession, they won't use the English language. They'll always use Latin or something like those dark language, like Arabic or Hebrew or something like that from years gone by. They will always use that.
Yeah, that seems to be a common one, doesn't it? For a proper, if they really are demonically possessed. I'm going to use that word because it just seems to be the great word. Demonically possessed. I don't often use that word, but I'm going to tonight because, why not? And, but other things like sending furniture flying without touching it, that's psychokinesis, right? Mm-hmm. There are people that claim they can do that. Not that they've ever proved it in a laboratory, but, people claim they can do it. Just speaking backwards. But didn't Leonardo da Vinci do that? Wasn't he able to speak and write backwards?
Yeah, I think he was, wasn't he?
So I wouldn't say he was demonically possessed. I'd just say he was an incredibly intelligent man. Mind you, he was a bit bonkers too, wasn't he?
I think all like Albert Einstein, everybody who had, those gifts of art and things like that, I think they all must have been quite eccentric or quite introvert people. Do you know what I mean? I know eccentric and introvert are the two opposite sides of the spectrum, but that's what you usually find. You usually find people who are absolutely amazing at drawing are very, very, withdrawn into themselves. Yeah,
or there's other issues like autism or something like that. They call it the mad genius, don't they?
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say that was necessarily a demonic possession scenario. But I suppose if you had all of these things in one person, you would be going, it's a little bit weird, right?
I don't think you'd be saying it's weird. I think you'd be saying, you need to get out of my house right now.
That's true. Right, let's have a look at some famous cases because we can get quite in depth on these. We're running out of time already.
This subject though is phenomenal though, isn't it? Because it's just you can talk about it for hours and hours and hours, and I've loved doing this today. I've absolutely loved it.
Yeah, it is one where you can go on and on with it because it is so in depth and so much information is out there, and from so many different spectrums and so many different angles as well, isn't it?
Definitely. But famous cases. So, Annalise, is it Michelle or is it Michael or Michael?
Well, I'm with you on this one. I think I heard someone earlier on a YouTube I was watching say it was Michael. Mm-hmm. But it could be any of the others and above. Just call her Annalise. We'll go with Annalise.
Yeah.
Now, she was born in 1952, Bavaria. Now, what struck me about this was the strength of belief system in this family. It was devout Catholic, wasn't it?
Yeah, and obviously her father studied to become a priest as well, and the three of her aunts were nuns. Mm-hmm. So, obviously, a very devout Catholic family.
Yeah, very, very devout Catholic. Now, there was a little secret within the family, and her mother had an illegitimate daughter called Martha, who was actually born 4 years before Annalise. But Martha died when Annalise was still a child. So Annalise hadn't created a bond with Martha. That wasn't the issue. But the stigma of that situation was very much obviously within the family, wasn't it? It was obviously something that really caused an issue within the family, this shame.
Well, yeah, because back in 1952 anyway, it would have, and especially if people were involved in the clergy, it would have been shameful. It would have been, frowned upon. And if they are extremist Catholics and things like that, then obviously it would have been quite difficult for the mother to actually. I find it really. I'm trying to explain myself, but it's not going to come across right well. But I actually feel quite sorry for the mother of this. Yeah, she had I can't even say that word, illegitimate daughter, but that daughter obviously died. Now, people would say that she would have died because obviously she brought shame on the family, and that would have been talked about quite heavily back in those days. But when Annalise was 16 and she started to have the seizures, and she was in and out of psychiatric hospitals and things like that, did her mother feel like she blamed herself for that? Or, I don't know, was she projecting her feelings onto her daughter? Or there's so many questions you really want to ask somebody, isn't there? And
yeah,
I don't think...
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, looking at this case, because of the way Annalise took that on, and almost like she was constantly doing penance for the sin of her mother. Do you know what I mean? But there's no information really regarding what the mother was doing, whether or not she was copying her mum in this penance, or what you were seeing within that family for Annalise to do that. I mean, then to start having epileptic seizures, I mean, bearing in mind she was 16, I mean, you think that's quite a profound time in a girl's life.
Yeah.
You know, and what with the upbringing that she'd had up to that point, and then she starts having these seizures. I mean, God, you know, then they started pumping her full of drugs.
Yeah.
And back then, in those days, the drugs probably weren't as tested or as advanced as we know today. So it makes you wonder the side effects of the drugs that were being had on her mentality. You know, she was on antipsychotic and anti-epileptic drugs. And it was at that point that her behaviour just got worse, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, but then we kind of sit there and we say, back in those days, it wasn't that long ago, was it?
No, not really.
It was like 56 years ago?
Yeah.
So you think about now, like the advancements in science and you know, medication and things like that. You know, would she have actually been all right now? That's kind of how I would look at it. Would she have sought the treatment that she'd desperately needed, and would she have been all right, rather than obviously what did happen to her, which we'll come to.
Yeah.
But you like you've just been saying, was she constantly being reprimanded by her father and her aunts for her mother's sins? And that's a massive burden to put on a 16-year-old girl, isn't it?
Yeah. Through her informative years. You know, it wouldn't have just started at 16, it would have been all through her informative years. So by the time she hit this, and then she started having seizures, I mean, one of the questions would be asked is, was the epilepsy or the epileptic seizures were actually caused by the pressure and the stress of the situation?
Yeah.
You know, is one of the questions that should have been asked. But, you know, and unless we turn the clock back and we can go back and ask those questions. I mean, hindsight's a wonderful thing looking at this case, and I think this case is quite
it's
useful.
Played with loads of things, isn't it? I think there was a lot of failings for that young girl, really. And there is a film, isn't there, about her back in the day, and it's called The Exorcism of Emily Rose, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it kind of details everything. But that poor girl endured 67 exorcisms.
Yeah.
That is horrendous.
Yeah. And also, depending on how the exorcism is being done, every time she's being exorcised, if they're talking in terms of talking to the entity that was supposed to have, you know, possessed her, bearing in mind they said that there wasn't one, that there were several, it reinforces that belief system that she is possessed, that what she's experiencing isn't the result of the drugs she was on and her upbringing and the stress that's been put under her mind and you know, on her mind and stuff like that. It's just reinforcing that belief that she is actually possessed. I mean, God, I have to say, when I was looking at the list of some of the figures or some of the entities that were supposed to have identified themselves throughout these exorcisms, I mean, there were things like Lucifer, Cain, Judas were all in there, Emperor Nero, Adolf Hitler. I mean, Jesus Christ. I mean, there's some big, hard-hitting figures there, right?
Yeah, but aren't they, when you look at that, though, I'm going to look at it from a debatable side of things, but all those people were the wrongdoers, weren't they? When you read the Bible and you read, you know, history books and things like that, they were the people who caused atrocity, who murdered people, who, you know, look at Judas Iscariot and, you know, Cain and Lucifer, the be-all and end-all, and Beelzebub. All of those people are the ones who are the wrongdoers within our well, within religion, aren't they?
Well, yes, you could say that.
I am touching upon a very touchy subject there, aren't I?
Yeah, you are. Well, no, because that's true. It's so true. I mean, I have to say, Judas, I was sitting there going, yeah, I mean, I know he betrayed Christ and that, but, you know, he was kind of coerced into that by the situation, and, you know, looking at it from that perspective, he weren't that bad, was he, really? I mean, okay, he's bad in regards to the story and what he did, you know, the ultimate betrayal, but then it was also, he's actually related, and I found this out, a small interesting little fact, in regards to Native Americans, they actually have a spirit that's to do with suicide.
Really?
And, yeah, and they say that people who commit suicide have been taken over by this suicide spirit. And I only read a brief thing, so I can't go into a lot of detail. I didn't learn that much about that. And obviously Judas committed suicide, didn't he? And that's like the ultimate sin.
Yeah.
And that's why he's in that list of bad people, because he committed the worst sin of all, which is taking your own life. If you want to look at it in those terms, which I thought was quite interesting.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. My belief is totally different on that sort of thing, but it's I think that's another subject for another night, though, isn't it?
Oh gosh, yeah. Honestly, I think we might have to do a part 2 of this, because we're really not getting through it, are we?
To be honest with you, I'm loving this, because it's like, oh, this subject of exorcisms and all the people that it's happened to and what's happened, it is so interesting. And do you know what? I'm so fascinated in it now. It's like, I'm quite liking this. So today, when you sent me certain things, because obviously it was only today that I knew I was going to be doing the show with you, and having a look at all the things, and then do my own research after work this evening, and kind of sitting talking to my partner, and I was like, oh, I'm just researching this, and it's so interesting. And, you know, coming from the paranormal background, you don't realise sometimes just how in depth you can actually go into something. And I think when you're a paranormal investigator, you kind of get your specialities, don't you? And there's certain people out there who like demonology. There's certain people who love, you know, going into the Victorian methods of investigating, and other people love making new things. Like Steve last night loves making new equipment for the girls to test, and they're all science based. But I just think, you know, to become a really good all-rounder, you need to kind of research everything. And I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah. It is fascinating. It is fascinating because, again, it brings that psychology into it, and, you know, why somebody might have gone down that route rather than a different route. I mean, when you start looking at her past life, and at least this is her past life, you kind of start seeing why psychology would kick in, and the belief system of her religion kicked in, and the situation within the family kicked in, and then adding to that an actual physical illness on top of that, you know. And then they start saying, oh, you're being possessed. It's like, well, that's, you know, look at the other issues before you start doing exorcisms. At 67, I mean, that's well excessive, right?
It's 67. Too excessive.
Yeah, it's really crazy. I mean, this poor girl ended up in such a state. She ended up permanently ruining her ligaments in her knees because she just kept dropping to her knees to genuflect. You know, she had open sores all over her body. She scratched herself and she was bleeding. Her mouth and her nose were raw. Her hair, well, you can imagine if she's not eating properly or, you know, drinking properly, her hair was a mess. She didn't bath, so she smelt. She used to urinate. We talked earlier on about urinating and defecating in weird places. Well, this girl was urinating on the floor, licking it up. And her voice always growled. Her voice ended up growling back at the tormented priest. Now, she was refusing food and drink at this point, and she just became more and more like an animal.
Well, yeah, because it's kind of going back to that animal state, isn't it? If you're not going to eat, you're not going to drink. I know it sounds stupid, but dehydration causes massive problems, doesn't it?
It does.
And
Massive.
obviously, yeah, you can hallucinate when you're dehydrated. If you don't eat, you're going to hallucinate. So, for all we know, she could be that dehydrated. She's hallucinating. She's, we all know what happens when you don't eat. You emaciate, don't you? Your body starts to eat itself. So, couple that with anything that she's probably thinking. She's a disappointment to her family because they're religious. It's just crazy. It's crazy that her family would inflict that on her anyway.
And also, you've got to assume at this point she's still having a cocktail of drugs regarding her, her epilepsy.
Yeah.
So what effect is that having on a non-fed, dehydrated body? And that's an assumption that she, at this point, was still taking those drugs. So we'd just like to point that out. I couldn't verify that point. Now, I did find some audio footage, which is actually quite horrible. I'm only going to play a little bit of it. And this has been out on the internet for quite a while, and it is supposed to be some of the actual audio that was recorded through one of her exorcisms. I could not verify this, but this is genuine. I will just like to point that out, but every site had the same piece of footage on it. So whether or not it's been generically copied throughout site after site, I don't know. But I'm going to play a little bit just to give you a little taste. Okay, so let's have a go at this.
Please declare.
Ja. Es dauert nämlich nicht mehr lang. Bis kommt das Strafgericht. Und nicht mehr lang
Not the öffentliche.
So when you listen to that, that's quite horrific, what you're hearing. If that is, as I say, a genuine piece of footage from one of the audios of one of her exorcisms, they did record it. Whether or not that is the actual recording, I cannot verify. I would just like to restate that. But it's quite horrific when you listen to that, and it doesn't sound like somebody who's just got a sore throat.
No, definitely not. That sounds evil, doesn't it? It does sound. I mean, we always talk about things with demonic possession and things like that, and it sounds horrendous, but she wasn't even speaking in her own language, was she?
I honestly don't know. I mean, I'm assuming it was some form of Germanic or something like that, that she was speaking there, because she was obviously Bavarian, so but I wouldn't like to say what language that was.
No, it's just it sounds horrendous. It doesn't sound right at all.
No. Anyway, when she died, she basically weighed 68 pounds and she was 23.
Wow.
So that's not very old at all, is it?
That's really sad, isn't it? That you know, she got to that age. So she suffered for 7 years. 7 years, 67 exorcisms in that time, and she weighed 68 pounds. That's just awful.
It's horrible, isn't it? Now, bearing in mind, following her death, both Annalise's parents and the two priests that were doing the exorcisms were actually charged with negligent manslaughter because they failed to call a doctor in her final days. Basically, her internal organs shut down, which was irreversible anyway. But a week before this, she could have been saved by even the simplest of medical care, they say. Now, this went to court. It didn't it?
Yeah, it did.
Yeah, and what happened was the prosecution actually only asked for a fine for the priests and a guilty verdict, but no punishment for the parents.
And that's horrendous, though, isn't it? But I think, didn't they... she died. They're saying that she died due to malnourishment and dehydration.
Yeah.
And her parents and the Catholic priest were actually found guilty of negligent homicide and were sentenced to 6 months in jail, reduced to 3 years of probation as well as a fine, which that's, for a life, that's horrendous.
It is. I mean, I have to say, one of the strangest things about that was they exhumed her body because some nun claimed that if her body was incorrupt, it would prove that she had been possessed. Well, they exhumed her and she was fine. Like, you know, she was decomposing as normal. You know, so that's why they ended up with the sentences that they got.
But doesn't that just...
It's still not enough, is it? Yeah.
That's what I just says to you, doesn't it? That if somebody says that if they exhume her body, that she's going to be all right, if it's not decomposed, then she's obviously been possessed. I mean, you know, science would tell you that she is going to decompose.
Yeah.
Surely. She was going to be a skeletal figure, wasn't she? So it's just, certain things back in those days, you just think, I shake my head at them sometimes.
It does make you wonder, but like you say, it wasn't that long ago, really, in relative terms. It wasn't that long ago.
It was 1952. I mean, she didn't die. That was, you know, she was 16 in 1952, and she died at 23 in 1976. That's 2 years before I was born, she died.
That's crazy,
So
when you look at it in those terms.
Yeah, that is crazy, because we look at how the paranormal and everything has kind of evolved since obviously we've been kind of kids and stuff. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I've seen massive changes over the recent years in it. But this is it never was heavily documented, was it, when we were kids?
No.
It was always hush hush. Whereas now, you know, like we were saying tonight, BBC News had somebody on saying that they could stop, you know, people becoming, you know, homosexual because they would not unpossess them, but that's what they were saying. And it was like, this is horrendous. Why on earth would you think that? It just beggars belief.
Even in this day and age, there's that thought pattern. I just don't get it, you know.
Yeah.
You brace everybody for who they are and what they are. Okay, if they're talking in tongues and spitting out pea green soup and their heads are turning around, then maybe you've got a possession going on. But, you know, no, not just because you're homosexual, for God's sakes. You know, it's absolutely ridiculous. Now, the Vatican first issued official guidelines on exorcism in 1614 and revised them in 1999. Now, after Annalise passed, the Church, or the Vatican, did look at reforms in how exorcisms were performed. That's one thing that I say, good thing that came out of that, but they didn't reform it enough. All they wanted to do is change a few words so you don't refer to the entity per se, because you're reinforcing the belief system. So all they did was basically change a few words, but they did revise them again in 1999. But like you said recently, they've just done another recruitment, as it were, of 250, was it?
Yeah, around about I think they said 250 new priests were going to be trained in exorcisms. And that was as early as like the 30th of March this year.
Which is quite a lot, isn't it, when you think? I mean, I once heard that every diocese has a trained exorcism. It's just not advertised. And I was thinking, really? Oh, my goodness. So every diocese, you know, area has got one priest that will be trained in exorcism.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I think there's been a meteorical rise, though, hasn't there, of people claiming that they've been possessed. So I'm guessing what we've been talking about with, you know, mental health and things like that, maybe that has seen a rise in people asking for priests to come and exorcise people, and that's probably prompted them to sit there and say, right, okay, well, we'll open our doors to train 250 priests, and that's what we'll do.
Yeah.
Are they going to do that every year?
And maybe because we're not aware of the training process, it's not just about it's classed under the exorcism scenario, but actually maybe the priests are being trained not in exorcisms per se. That might be the smallest part of their training. It might be in counselling mental health patients and, you know, that sort of thing, rather than, and the exorcism part is actually the tiniest part of that training, as it were. So I wouldn't, it might be a sensationalism headline, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, we know the media hype things up anyway, don't we?
That's
but
true.
It's kind of like when you actually look. I actually looked into that earlier about what they actually study, and it was all about the theology about it, and it was all about it's sacramental, but it's not a sacrament. So it's unlike baptism or confession. So exorcisms, it's kind of I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to get within society now, because obviously they know that so many people suffer, and I think if they can label it, I think that's what they're trying to do. That's my perception of it.
Okay, but it cross cultures. We've said this right at the beginning of the show. It's cross cultures. I mean, even in today, we're seeing cases where there are horrific cases in the news, even into this day and age. I mean, in 2003, an autistic boy in Milwaukee was killed by an exorcism by the church members who blamed an invading demon for his disability.
No.
2003. 2005. A young nun in Romania died at the hands of a priest during an exorcism after being bound to a cross, gagged and left for days without food or water in an effort to expel demons.
What on earth goes through these people's minds?
I don't know. And this is a case that hit in England on Christmas Day in 2010. Now, this was one that I remember. And bearing in mind, this is 8 years ago. A 14-year-old boy named Christy Bamu was beaten and drowned to death by relatives trying to exorcise an evil spirit from the boy. That is a whole case in itself. I'm not going to discuss it any further because there are obviously relatives still living in this day and age regarding that case. And if you want to look that one up for yourselves, then please go ahead and do so. But that happened 8 years ago. And when you look on the internet, there are hundreds and thousands of people offering exorcisms. And I think it is an area that needs to be seriously looked at, because you can pay thousands of pounds worth of money in the name of exorcising or cleansing. And it is open doors, really, isn't it, Jo?
That's what we were saying, though, weren't we, earlier? It needs to be regulated. It needs to be, you know, people need to be registered and have a governing body. I hate saying that, though, but it does need to be, because people will take advantage.
They will. Whereas I have to say, this is where kind of the church does good, because I don't believe a priest would go in and just perform an exorcism without serious looking at the case and do it. You know, I think some of these cases are very extreme. Maybe the Romanian case was in the countryside, you know, where it wasn't mainstream, you know, backwater, as it were, a little bit. I can't verify that case. I would just like to say I looked into it a little bit, but ran out of time.
Yeah. But we all know the church is heavily subsidised, though, don't we? We all know that the church is probably one of the richest organisations in the whole world. So we know that, don't we?
But they do a lot of good. I feel a little bit like we've done a little church bashing tonight, and I want to flip the side of it, because if priests are coming across cases of people saying, I think my family member is possessed by a demon, then maybe, just maybe, the training the priests receive these days is not jump to the conclusion it's a demonic possession. They look into many other things like mental health before they even go down that route. I'm sure it's not as easy as it's made to sound. Get a priest in for an exorcism. You know what I mean? I'm sure it's not quite as easy as that. But we're actually coming to the end of the show, Jo.
I know, and we could talk about this all night, couldn't we? I think.
Yeah, well, we've got another 2 or 3 famous cases that we wanted to explore tonight, and we didn't get a chance to. We got into Annalise, and that was that. So I do feel that this is probably a subject that we may well revisit at some point in the future. But for now, I think we're going to have to leave it there. Don't forget, guys, on the Parasearch Radio group page, we actually have a competition running. It's to win 4 back copies of Haunted Magazine, kindly donated by Mr. Paul Stevenson. So if you're interested in entering that, pop over to the Parasearch Radio group page. You'll find lives, you'll find the shows, you'll find interesting articles we find as we're out and about scrolling through things, and you will find the competition itself, and all you have to do is enter your name and be a liker of the Parasearch Radio group page, obviously. Oh, thank you so much for joining me tonight, Jo. Interesting topic, right?
I think it's, do you know what? I can't wait to start talking about it again. I'm amazed by everything that an hour has just gone so quick. It's like I could speak about this all night. I love it. Yeah,
absolutely fascinating. One for you guys, if you want to go and find out a little bit more. A little hint, have a look into the history of Anna Eklund. She's a famous, or not so famous, exorcism case, which we didn't get a chance to talk about, but as I say, I'm sure we'll come back to it at some point. On that note, thank you all for listening, and we bid you a very farewell and a good night.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.